and I'm here to talk about Bhakti. Remember, Bhakti is devotion leading to liberation. It is for those people who are emotional and see their emotional feelings of love as a path to moksha, to liberation. But remember, what's behind everything according to Hinduism? Well, it is Brahman. But how do you show attachment and love and emotion to Brahman when Brahman is an impersonal essence, right? An energy behind everything. In fact, as we said before, anytime we use human language to describe Brahman, it falls short. It's a little bit like if you've gotten financial documents, oftentimes there'll be a page included that says, this page left intentionally blank, as on the screen. And I always thought that such a statement is ironic because when you write this page left intentionally blank, it is no longer blank. The very act of saying that it's blank means that it's no longer true. Well, so with descriptions of Brahman, every time we use human language to conceptualize Brahman, it ultimately falls short and distorts. And philosophically, this makes sense. But if you look at the path of Bhakti, it creates a problem. Because how does one conceptualize a impersonal essence? Now, if you are philosophically inclined, this might be perfectly fine for you. But most of us need something more personable. So let's do a little experiment. Put down your pens and close your eyes. Now for 10 seconds, we're going to meditate on a neutered principle that has no personality to it. Something that's beyond all beyond. Something that any type of human thought makes it fall short. So let's just do that for 10 seconds. Close your eyes and I will let you know. Oh, excuse me. We're done. Sorry about that. Didn't quite make 10 seconds. You probably wondered what that cough was, but this is the point. It's very hard not to give Brahman some form. And remember, if Brahman's like gravity, it doesn't make sense to pray to Brahman. You don't love Brahman. So what do? Well, humans never think or rarely think in the abstract. When you're teaching a kid how to do arithmetic, you don't say, imagine the concept of 2, and now imagine the concept of 3, and then let's put these two together to have an imaginary 5. No, you give them 2 blocks and 3 blocks, and you say, put together, what do you see? We give things forms in order to think. And this is what Hinduism has done. Let's follow this through here. What they've said is that Brahman should be understood in 2 different ways. First is without any form. The term for form in Sanskrit is guna. And so nirguna Brahman is Brahman in and of itself, the essence itself, the spiritual essence behind everything, the thing that has no capability of being captured by human language and reason. But humans can give Brahman form. This is Brahman saguna. Sa is with, guna form, so with form. And so humans can give Brahman form in order to relate to it. And so so we can think of Brahman as having 2 levels, an infinite, incomprehensible, ineffable, highest layer, known as nirguna Brahman, and a lower, defined, concrete saguna Brahman. They're both the same thing, but Brahman in the latter sense has been adjusted for human limitations. And so the gods as we know them in Hinduism, whether they're Shiva, Vishnu, or Devi, they are concretizations of Nirguna Brahman. They are attempts by humans to conceptualize Brahman so that we can relate to it. And some people say this is one of the fundamental tasks of religion generally. That is, there's a source in the universe that is always mysterious. The human task of religion is to make sense of that mysterious force. So the Tao Te Ching in China says the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The Christian Cyril of Jerusalem says, "For explain not what God is, but candidly confess that we have not exact knowledge concerning him. For in what concerns God, to confess our ignorance is the best knowledge." In Kabbalah Judaism, which is a mystical form of Judaism, in the end, God is An Sof, the infinite unknowable one. And in Sufi Islam, a form of Islam, says God is the beyond beyond, or the hidden of the hidden. The point is, many people have said that the goal of religion is to make the mysterious force in the universe comprehensible to limited humans. That is to take what is conceivable and to take what is ultimately inconceivable and make it conceivable, to give concrete form to the spiritual source behind everything. And so, how many gods are there in Hinduism? Well, there's an infinite amount, because in the end, gods are just the attempt to make sense of what is behind everything, which is Brahman. There's one tradition that says there's 330 million gods in Hinduism, but it's all relative. It's all an attempt to say there's an infinite amount. And so, is Hinduism polytheistic? Well, yes, in some sense, there's 300 million gods, but in other sense, it's purely monotheistic. All of them are manifestations of that one energy. So there's one source behind everything. And so I think it's best to think of it as more as qualified polytheism or qualified monotheism. That is, in the end, Hinduism is a form where there's a monotheistic base. Brahman is the source of everything, but there are many gods that have windows into it. And in this sense, every single god is a portal to Brahman, a portal to the infinite. They do not represent the wholeness of Brahman, but they are a window into Brahman. They are the way in which one approaches the non-concrete Brahman. Any one of them can be used as a realization for Brahman. And so Hindus will say, for example, that Jesus is just Brahman for the West. That is the way the West conceptualizes the God, the source behind everything. And so we're all reaching for the same ultimate reality, that is Brahman. However, there's an infinite number of portals to understand that Brahman, to realize that Brahman. And so Hinduism has come to use an analogy that I find very useful. At the top of the mountain is Brahman. Our spiritual life is a journey up that mountain. All of us have different paths. We're all residing at the bottom of the mountain. We all start our spiritual journeys in different places. And when we look up the mountain, there is a pathway that makes sense to us. Our goal is to follow that pathway. So this guy, he's got a zigzaggy path. This guy has a more zigzaggy but different path. This person has a very zigzaggy path, and this person has a direct path. Here's the point. We all have our own spiritual paths that are true and real and useful to us. But at the top, they all converge at Brahman. In other words, all the spiritual paths end up in the same place. But here's the challenge. That when we look at the spiritual path ahead of us, it just seems so obvious, so clear. This is the path. And I might be tempted to think that my path that is so clear to me is the path for everyone. But what Hinduism says is no, that is the path for you. You should realize that that path is specific to you. And so if you identify with Shiva, or you identify with Allah, or you identify with Jesus, or you identify with the Tao, that may seem like the most real thing in the world to you. And it is your path, and you should follow it. But you should not assume that is the path for everyone. That is, you should embrace the idea that there are many paths for different people and encourage other people to go on their path. And especially, you should not go around the world telling people that your path is the only path. In other words, what you should say is find your window to Brahman and follow it. Now, this does not mean that the spiritual paths are relative. There are many false paths. If you think the path up the mountain is to walk backwards 100 feet, you're wrong. If you think the path up the mountain involves torturing little babies, you're wrong. So just because there are multiple ways to realize Brahman, that doesn't mean that the spiritual path is relative. There are multiple right paths, but there are also multiple wrong paths. The goal of life is to discover what is your portal to Brahman. And it could be one of the traditional gods like Shiva or Vishnu or Jesus, but it also could be something else theoretically. It could be wine. It could be pugs. It could be nature. It could be surfing. That is, the goal of life is to find and devote yourself to a pathway that leads to liberation. And there could be many, many pathways along that way. And so, generally speaking, Hinduism has been very tolerant of different traditions. Let me tell you a story. So, I have some of my past students who went on to be missionaries for Christianity in India. And one of the stories they came back with said, hey, as they shared Jesus with people, many of the Indians were like, awesome, I love this guy, he's great. And they're like, oh, so you're on board, you're going to become a Christian. And they're like, totally, I love him, it's great. And they say, okay, so now you need to reject the other paths. And that's where Hindus get off the train. Because they're like, why? If this is a path that's meaningful to me, that doesn't mean I need to reject other paths. In other words, there are multiple paths up the mountain, and we should be tolerant of other paths that may not be mine. Does it make sense that since we all start at different places, there's only one path? No, there are many paths up the mountain, and what Hinduism says is find the path that's meaningful to you. Now, let's say that you want to use pugs as a pathway to Brahman. Here's the challenge, that if you choose a traditional pathway, then there are many tools and guides to help you go up the mountain. In other words, there are hymns that have already been written. There are catechisms and philosophies that support your worldview. There are ethical norms. There are communities. There are rituals. There are holidays and celebratory calendars in support of your path. If you choose the path of pugs, as worthy as pugs are as a religion, you have to develop that all yourself. And so while there are an infinite number of potential portals to Brahman, some are more difficult than others because they don't have the same support networks involved. And so, in Hinduism, they would say that it's probably best to stick to the traditional gods. And they're traditionally known as the Trimurti, the three forms of Brahman. And those are Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. And so these are three god complexes that have a rich support network as you travel up the mountain. Now, in practice, there are very few temples and people that are supported to Brahma alone. And so the Trimurti, the three forms that are actually used on the ground most and are really Vishnu, again, and Shiva, but also Devi, the goddess. That is, these are the three forms that most Indians or Hindus will identify with. Devi, Vishnu, and Shiva. And so there'll be a question on the exam that talks about the Trimurti in classical form or in literature, and the Trimurti in practice or on the ground. And the difference is, in literature, they talk about Brahma as a third most important deity, but on the ground, it's really Devi in consort with Vishnu and Shiva. So we'll spend a little bit of time now and read the following about each one of these forms, because each one of these forms describes an aspect of Brahman that is really important.